They called him Silas Thorne, and in them parts, his name carried more weight than a sack of silver. Owned near 1,000 acres, just past Deadwood's edge, where the hills rolled golden in summer and frosted white in winter. His house, a mansion by frontier standards, sat like a crown atop the land. But inside them fine walls? Well, there weren't much but shadows and silence. Silas had built his fortune off the backs of miners and cattlemen, and not one of them could say he'd ever raised his voice or his hand. But neither could they say they'd seen him smile. Folks reckoned he was carved from the same stone that lined his cellar, cold, hard, and too proud to crack. Now Silas wasn't always that way. Once, many years ago, he'd been a different man, wide-eyed, full of hope, and maybe even love. But love's a tricky filly, and when his young wife died birthing their only child, a girl named Cora, something inside Silas turned brittle. He sent the babe off to live with kin out east, and buried his heart right beside his wife's grave under the cottonwood tree. By the time Cora returned, 17 and soft-spoken, Silas barely recognized her. She was kind, curious, with her mother's smile and none of her father's shadows. But where he offered coin, she craved company. Where he gave jewels, she longed for laughter. And that, dear reader, was something Silas didn't know how to give. Now, down in the valley where the grass grew lush and the creek ran clear, there lived a girl named Maribelle. She weren't rich, nor was she schooled beyond her numbers and letters, but she had a gift, one not taught by books. Maribelle could make things grow. Flowers, vegetables, friendships, didn't matter. She had a touch, and a voice like a summer breeze after a thunderstorm. Cora met Maribelle at the chapel garden, where the girl came to trade her herbs and roots for flour and candles. They got to talking, and before long, Cora was slipping out the estate to sit cross-legged in Maribelle's dirt patch, laughing about nothing and everything. Silas didn't notice at first. He spent most his days in the study, papers piled high, counting things that didn't matter and forgetting the things that did. But come one rain-soaked evening, when Cora didn't return by supper, he sent a rider into town. She came back safe and dry, cheeks pink with laughter, talking about soup and stories, and a girl with bare feet and sun in her hair. That night, Silas sat by the hearth, listening to the wind rattle his windows, and he realized, for the first time in years, he was lonely. He'd built a kingdom, aye, but what good's a kingdom with no laughter in the halls? And so the wheel of fate began to turn, slow and sure, drawn by a girl with dirt under her nails and a heart big enough to soften stone. Maribelle had a garden that didn't just grow, it sang. Not with words, mind you, but with color and scent and the low hum of bees that always seemed to know they were safe there. Cornflowers and sweet peas, squash vines and sage, all coiled and stretched like dancers in the sun. Her cabin, small and slanting slightly eastward, stood at the edge of that patch, surrounded by a crooked fence and hope. When Cora came to visit, she brought with her the rustle of silk skirts and the scent of perfume from a life too clean, too controlled. She sat on an overturned bucket, hands tucked in her lap, as Maribelle showed her how to pinch basil without bruising it and how to tell if a tomato was ripe by its smell alone. "What does your father do all day in that big house?" Maribelle asked one morning, not unkindly. Cora looked down. "He works. He counts things. Gold, mostly." Maribelle raised an eyebrow. "Gold don't feed a soul. You ever see a coin sprout leaves?" That made Cora laugh. A real one. And Maribelle tucked that sound away like a seed. Now Silas, for his part, began noticing things. The way his daughter hummed under her breath, the herbs drying by the kitchen window, the scent of wild mint on her dresses. He asked her once, "Where do you go?" "To see a friend," she replied. Simple as that. Silas said nothing, but the next day he rode down the valley just to see. He didn't approach, mind you, just stood on a ridge and looked. Saw a girl in a faded blue dress bent over a row of carrots. Saw his daughter, laughing as she fumbled with a spade. Saw something warm and real, something he hadn't touched in years. That night, Silas stood at the hearth, staring at the cold grate. Then slowly, he knelt and lit a fire. First time in 5 winters, he'd done it himself. Come morning, He asked the cook if she had any of that mint tea his daughter seemed so fond of. The woman stared at him like he'd grown horns. "Just fetch it," he said. And somewhere down in that garden, Maribelle felt the wind shift. Not hard, not sharp, just a nudge, like the land itself was taking a breath. Little did they know, a storm was building far off on the horizon, not of weather, but of pride, secrets, and the long, stubborn kind of hurt only time can grow. It was near midsummer when the trouble began, the kind that don't howl or clamor, just creeps in quiet, like rot under paint. Silas Thorne, for all his gold and grit, had enemies. Not the kind that shot at you from behind a boulder, but the kind that smiled too wide and drank your whiskey while plotting your fall. One of them was Jasper Hill, a banker with a handshake slick as a river rock and a ledger full of favors owed. Now, Jasper'd always eyed the Thorne estate. Too much land, too few hands working it, and he never much liked that Silas hadn't needed his loans, hadn't bowed his head or played the part of grateful debtor. That burned Jasper deep. So when word spread that Silas was riding down the valley, not for business, but to visit some wild-haired girl in a peasant's dress, well, that was all the kindling Jasper needed. "He's gone soft," he muttered to a pair of ranchers at the saloon, "giving away his fortune to some village tramp, they say." Now that wasn't true, not by a damn mile. Silas had never even spoken to Maribelle. Not yet. But rumors, they travel faster than the truth, and they're a sight more fun at the poker table. Cora heard the whispers first. Folks smirking behind her back, asking if she was learning new talents down in that garden. She told Maribelle, ashamed and hurt, and Maribelle's smile faltered for the first time since they'd met. "I ain't ashamed of dirt on my hands," Maribelle said, "but I don't aim to be used like a story in someone else's mouth." The friendship cooled, like spring giving way to a dry summer. Cora stayed away, uncertain, and Maribelle kept to her garden, pulling weeds like they were thoughts she couldn't quite speak. Silas noticed. The house fell quiet again, and he felt it in his bones, like the weight of years creeping back over his shoulders. One morning, he left a note on the hall table. Gone to ride. He made for the valley. Not fast, not like a man chasing love or answers, just steady, like he meant to get there and didn't much care who knew it. When he reached the garden, Maribelle was there, arms deep in the earth, her back to him. He cleared his throat, but she didn't turn. "I heard what they say," he said. "So VEI," she answered, voice flat. "I reckon I've been a fool. A rich one, but a fool all the same." She stood, brushed dirt from her hands, and faced him. "What do you want, Mr. Thorne?" Silas Thorne, owner of land and gold, paused. "To start again," he said. "Don't rightly know how, but maybe you could teach me." Maribelle studied him. The wind tugged at her skirts, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried over the hills. "You don't grow a tree by yelling at the dirt," she said at last. "You sit with it, water it, wait." Silas nodded, slow. "I can wait." And that, my friend, was the first real seed between them, planted not in love or longing, but in honesty. And that's rarer than gold out here. Time passed, slow and tender. Silas started visiting more regular, not every day, but enough that the dust of silence began to lift from his boots. He never came empty-handed. Sometimes he brought seed packets, strange and foreign, cantaloupe from Georgia, heirloom squash from Missouri. Other times, he brought questions. What makes basil bolt early? Why do you plant marigolds near your beans? And Maribelle, well, she answered like a teacher who'd never been in a schoolhouse. Calm, patient, never once treating him like a fool. They never spoke of his gold, nor his past. Just soil, sun, and sometimes silence. And Silas, he came to crave that silence. Not the heavy kind he kept in his mansion, but the peaceful sort, like the hush before rain on warm dirt. Meanwhile, Cora kept her distance. She loved Maribelle like a sister, but she wasn't blind to the way her father looked at the girl now. Not lustful, no, but something deeper, softer, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Her father, the man who'd locked the world out, was now looking at a barefoot girl like she held the keys to heaven. One evening, Cora returned to the garden. The air was thick with honeysuckle, and the sun was bowing low. Maribelle met her with a quiet smile and a cup of chamomile tea. "I missed you," Cora said. Maribelle nodded. "Me too." "Is it true?" Cora asked, voice trembling. Do you care for him?" Maribelle stared into her tea. "I care for the man who listens when I speak, who don't flinch when I speak plain. That man, I think he's just now starting to breathe again." Cora blinked back tears. "I ain't mad. I never thought I'd see him like this. Not again. I didn't mean to take him from you," Maribelle whispered. "You didn't," Cora said, placing her hand over hers. "You gave him back." But not everyone was so kind. Jasper Hill and his ilk had grown louder. "Old Thorne's bewitched," they'd say at the saloon, letting a hedge which play house on his land. Next she'll be after his deed. One night, Silas rode back from the garden and found a warning carved into his barn door. "Witch's gold turns black." He stared at it long and hard, jaw tight, then walked inside without a word. But in the morning, he rode straight to town and bought a new signboard, painted it himself in steady, bold letters. "Property of S. Thorne. Trespassers will be fed to the roots." Folks laughed, but the laughter was nervous. The line had been drawn, and Silas, once a man with land and gold and no joy, now had something to fight for. Silas Thorne began to change, not all at once, but like a mountain in the wind after a long winter. The workers on his land noticed it first. He started walking the fields, asking questions, calling men by name. Started eating his supper in the great hall again, not hunched over a tray in his study. Even started bringing books from the city, gardening almanacs, herb guides, and leaving them on the front porch of Maribelle's cabin, like breadcrumbs from a lonely man trying to find his way back to life. Maribelle, she didn't swoon or soften. She just kept planting, kept teaching. But her smile, it came easier, and when she spoke to Silas, her voice didn't carry the edge it once had. Now one morning, he brought her something different, a sapling, wrapped in burlap, no taller than his hip. "A persimmon," he said. "My wife liked him." I figured, he trailed off unsure. Maribelle looked at the little tree, then at the man. "That kind don't bear fruit for years," she said. "I know," he replied. "I ain't in a rush." They planted it together, hands dirty, silence between them that said more than words ever could. But peace don't come easy in places like this. Not when folks get it in their head that someone's stepping out of their place. One dusk, as the sun bled red behind the hills, a fire broke out near Maribelle's fence line. Dry brush caught fast, flames licking the sky like hungry tongues. She fought it barefoot, calloused hands blistering, till the neighbors came running with pails. Silas was the last to arrive, breathless, with soot on his sleeves and fury in his eyes. When the fire was out, Maribelle stood shaking, staring at her charred beans, her scorched sunflowers. "I planted those myself," she whispered. "I'll rebuild the whole damn thing." Silas swore. "No," she said, voice steady. "You'll help. I don't need a savior. Just someone to stand beside me." And by heaven he did. Next day, boots in the dirt, sweat on his brow, Silas dug with the rest of them. Folks watched from the road, stunned. A man worth more than half the county, working shoulder to shoulder with a girl most wouldn't give the time of day. That night, Maribelle poured 2 mugs of wildflower tea and handed him one. "You ain't who you were," she said. Silas stared into the steam. "No," he agreed, "and I thank God for it." Out beyond the field, the stars blinked like watchful eyes. The garden was blackened, sure, but already shoots were poking through the ash. Love, it turns out, grows best in broken ground. Now, if you ask me, the past is a stubborn old mule. Don't matter how far you ride or how deep you bury it. It'll come back round, snorting and stomping, demanding to be seen. It was just after the first frost when he showed up, Caleb Thorne, Silas's brother. Most folks thought him dead, or at least gone for good. Last anyone saw, he'd been heading west, chasing silver in Nevada, drinking hard and running faster. But there he stood on Silas's front porch, tall and lean with a crooked grin and a coat too fine for a drifter. "Brother," Caleb said, tipping his hat. Heard you'd gone soft. Figured I'd come see for myself. Silas's jaw clenched. You ain't welcome. Sure I am. Blood's blood, and you got more land than you know what to do with. Caleb sauntered inside without waiting, boots dirty and smile sharper than a skinning knife. Now see, Caleb had always been the charmer. Quick with a joke, quicker with a lie. Folks liked him, till they learned better. He stayed the night, uninvited, and by morning, word had spread. Silas's long-lost kin had returned. Maribelle met him on the garden path that afternoon. He tipped his hat and gave her that same crooked smile. Well now, you must be the reason my brother started acting like a man again. Maribelle stared him down. You always speak in riddles, or just when you're scheming. Caleb laughed, low and amused. Feisty. I like that. She didn't answer, just kept weeding, but her back went stiff, and her fingers dug harder than needed. By week's end, Silas knew trouble was stirring. Caleb had begun sweet-talking the townsfolk, spreading doubts, saying maybe the old man wasn't fit to run an estate anymore. Maybe the girl in the valley had her claws too deep. Cora confronted her father. He's poison, she said. Always was. You know it. I do, Silas said. But poison spreads fast if you don't burn it out. And burn it he did. One night, Silas called a gathering, invited the town's council, the ranch hands, even Jasper Hill. He stood on his porch beside Maribelle and read aloud a new will, one that left the land to Cora, with Maribelle as steward of the gardens and workers' cottages. No gold, no titles, he said. Just earth, and the ones who know how to care for it. Caleb scoffed, loud and bitter. So you're giving it all to a girl who talks to roots? Silas stepped down, face lined with fire and years. I'm giving it to someone who remembers what it means to grow. There wasn't applause, just silence, heavy and long. But in that silence, Caleb turned and walked away, coat flapping, like a whip behind him. He never came back. That night, Silas sat beside Maribelle, dirt still on his hands. I reckon I should be afraid, he said. Of what? Of trusting someone again. Maribelle leaned close, voice soft as dusk. A man who fears trust ain't lived long enough in truth. And under the cottonwood tree, where his wife lay and his daughter once played, Silas closed his eyes and let the ghosts rest. Winter came down hard that year. Frost crusted the windows like lace, and the sky hung heavy with snow, just waiting to fall. Up at the Thorne house, fires burned high, and the kitchen filled with the scent of stews and herbs Maribelle brought in, bundled in cloth, still warm from her breath. She'd taken to spending more time indoors now, not as a guest, nor as a servant, but as something in between. Her boots stayed by the door, her basket by the stove. And Silas, well, he started looking like a man who'd remember how to breathe. One evening, with the wind moaning low through the pines, he caught her humming to herself while she mended a curtain. It was a song his wife used to sing, soft and slow, like creek water over stones. He stood there a long while before speaking. You knew that tune. Maribelle looked up, blinking, like she'd just remembered he was there. My mama sang it, said it was older than sorrow. Silas smiled faintly. That it is. They sat together after that, not talking, just sitting. Her stitching, him with a cup of coffee gone cold. And in that quiet something passed between them, not heat, not fire, but a warmth steadier than both, like coals under snow waiting. But outside them walls, tongues wagged. At the general store, folks muttered about the witch sleeping in the Thorne house. Said she'd cast a spell, bewitched the man. Said he'd lost his mind, given her land, letting her sit beside his daughter like kin. Even Jasper Hill, still sour from losing his chance at Silas's estate, stirred the pot. Next thing you know, she'll be where his ring. He sneered over his whiskey. And one day, that rumor reached Cora. She found Maribelle near the henhouse, plucking feathers from a freshly butchered bird. Are you going to marry him? Cora asked, voice tight. Maribelle paused, set the bird down slow. I ain't asked, she said. Ain't offered. But would you? Cora's eyes were sharp, hurt. Maribelle met her gaze. Only if it meant I could still look you in the eye after. Cora blinked, and for a moment, she looked like the little girl who once cried over a lost kitten. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. Maribelle stepped forward, her hands still red with work. "You won't. Love don't work like that. It don't divide. It multiplies." That night, Silas took a walk. Snow crunching under his boots, breath fogged in the air. He found Maribelle sitting on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. "Folks are talking," he said. "They always will. You scared?" She shook her head, only of missing a chance to say yes. Silas sat beside her, pulled a small velvet pouch from his coat. Inside a ring, not fancy, but carved with vines and stars. "It was my wife's," he said. "She'd want someone with dirt under their nails to wear it." Maribelle took the ring, turned it over in her fingers. Then she nodded once. "All right," she said, "but only if you promise me this." "What's that?" "No more fences. Not between us. Not on the land. We grow together. Or not at all." And Silas, for the first time in years, smiled like a man who'd finally come home. The wedding was set quiet. No grand parade or fanfare. Just a gathering of neighbors, friends, and frostbitten fields. The chapel was plain, wooden and wind-worn, but the candles glowed warm, and the smell of pine boughs hung in the air. Maribelle wore no veil, just her best blue dress, mended 3 times at the hem, and her hair braided down her back with a sprig of rosemary tucked in. Silas wore his old wool coat, and boots polished as best they could be. But neither looked at their clothes, just each other. When the preacher asked the words, Silas didn't flinch. "I've buried love once," he said aloud. "Didn't think I'd see it again. But this woman, she brought it back with dirt-stained hands and a voice that cuts cleaner than any blade." And Maribelle, voice clear and sure, answered. He thought gold would make him rich, but he didn't know how poor he was till he saw a garden grow again. They exchanged rings beneath the rafters, and the wind outside died down like even the sky was listening. But joy don't come without a tax. That very night, just hours after the vows were spoken, a rider arrived breathless from the valley, one of the tenant farmers. His boy had gone missing in the snowstorm that had started just past dusk. He went out looking for the goat pen. Ain't come back. Silas and Maribelle exchanged one look. No words needed. The wedding supper hadn't even been served, but they grabbed cloaks and lanterns and rode out. Through the blizzard they went, hollering the boy's name into the white noise. Cora stayed back at the farmhouse, tending fires, waiting, with blankets warm and cocoa steaming. For hours they searched, until Maribelle caught a sound, faint and weak, but real. They found him curled in a dry gully, wrapped in a scrap of burlap, lips blue and breath shallow. Silas lifted the boy like he weighed nothing, wrapped him in his own coat. They rode hard back to the house, where Cora opened the door wide, tears streaming down her cheeks. The boy lived, but the wedding feast sat cold and untouched on the table. That night, the 3 of them sat at the hearth, Maribelle, Silas, and Cora, with the boy asleep by the fire. No cake, no music, but joy all the same. "I reckon this is how it should be," Silas said, hand resting on Maribelle's. "Not all pomp and pretty words. Just this. Us. The work. The heart of it." Maribelle leaned against him. "Ain't no richer meal than saving someone." The wind moaned outside again, but inside, the flame danced steady. Outside, the frost bit hard, but inside, the thaw had begun in full. Come late February, the thaw began to lick at the edges of the valley. Snow melted in rivulets down the hills, and the garden, burned bare months ago, showed green poking through the ash. Life, stubborn and sure, always finds a way. Silas had changed, not just in how he looked or moved, but in how he listened. He spent mornings by the henhouse, afternoons walking the property with the workers, a skin, what they needed, not what they owed. Some folks warmed to it, others not so much. Jasper Hill wasn't done. He'd been biding his time, watching, waiting, and now he had his move. One early spring morning, he arrived at the county office with a claim that Silas Thorne, in his weakened mental state, had signed over land illegally to an outsider with no legal standing. He brought witnesses, men bought with drink and debt, and he brought old records, twisted just enough to look real. It landed fast. A summons. A hearing. The lawman rode up the Thorne estate with dust on his coat and a face carved from granite. Silas read the notice without a word, then folded it slow and tucked it in his coat. Maribelle said nothing at first, but that night, by the hearth, she asked, "You gonna fight?" Silas looked up. "Ain't no choice, is there?" "There's always choice," she said. "But this ain't just about you anymore. It's about every soul who ever loved a piece of land and got told they weren't good enough to own it." So they went to court. Not a big city courtroom, but a drafty hall with a tin stove and dusty windows. Silas stood tall, coat clean, voice steady. And when Jasper began his lies, Maribelle stood too. And then Cora. She read a letter aloud, a statement of her own, penned by hand, every word etched with pride. "My father was once a man who counted coins and nothing more. I watched him forget how to laugh. And I watched this woman, Maribelle, remind him. She didn't take his mind. She gave him back his heart." The room was quiet. Even the judge, an old man with a spine stiff from war and winters, nodded slow. "Don't see love like that every day," he murmured. "Not the loud kind. The real kind." The ruling came down. Jasper's claims were tossed like garbage in a rain barrel. Silas's gifts of land upheld. Maribelle's stewardship recognized in full. When it was done, Jasper left in a fury, spurs jangling like the tail of a snake. Silas turned to Maribelle. "You reckon it's over?" She smiled. "Things like this, they don't end. They just settle, like dirt after a storm." And so it did. That night, back at the estate, the three of them, Silas, Maribelle, and Cora, stood on the porch and watched the stars blink back into the sky. Silas put his arm around Maribelle's shoulder. "You gave me joy," he said, voice thick. "No," she whispered. "I just cleared the weeds. You found the joy under all that stone." Spring came in like a hymn that year, soft and sure, sung by streams unthawed and buds stretching skyward. The valley turned green again, not just in leaf, but in spirit. And at the Thorne estate, laughter became the loudest thing echoing off the hills. The garden, once burned and buried, was now a marvel. Rows of squash, beans climbing their poles like eager children, and flowers, so many flowers, that even the bees came back early. Folk started visiting, not out of nosiness, but out of joy. They came for herbs and vegetables, aye, but they stayed for stories, for tea, for the strange comfort that Maribelle's quiet strength and Silas's newfound warmth offered. Even Jasper Hill, now tucked away behind his shame and whiskey, faded into memory like a bad winter. Cora opened a small schoolhouse in the east pasture, teaching the children of workers and farmers both. "No one should feel less," she said, chalk in hand and fire in her eyes, "not cause of gold or dirt or the name they carry." One afternoon, while digging out a new patch for late corn, Maribelle paused and looked to the cottonwood tree, the same one where Silas's first love lay beneath the earth. She walked over, knelt, and pressed her palm against the soil. "I ain't replacing you," she whispered, "just continuing what you started." Silas watched from a distance, his heart full of memories and meaning. He joined her there, dropped to one knee, and dug his hands into the dirt beside hers. Together, they planted a tree, not for shade nor fruit, just for legacy. That evening, they sat on the porch, rockers creaking, sun setting slow behind the hills. Silas reached for her hand, rough and calloused like his own, and said, "Funny thing." "What's that?" she asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I thought gold was my legacy. Turns out it was just dust. This." He nodded to the garden, the hills, the girl inside writing lessons by candlelight. "This is what lasts." Maribelle smiled, quiet as twilight. "Joy don't come in sacks. It grows, one root at a time." And in that stillness, with the stars winking overhead and the land warm beneath them, Silas Thorne, man of gold and grief, finally rested easy. For he had land, he had love, and at long last he had joy.